The evening. Visit chambers630.com to register.
This is Chicago's Morning Answer with Dan Proft and Amy Jacobson on AM 560. The Answer.
Top of the morning, Dan and Amy. The consequences of sanctuary city, county, state policies, the consequences of the lack of seriousness the political ruling class in D.C. has about border security, and the political ruling class is spread over our major urban centers, including the one in which we find ourselves. How about the one out west in L.A.? Officials revealing this week that 19 of 22 suspects charged in what they call medieval-style killing of 7 people in California came into the country illegally in the last 3 or 4 years. 19 of 22 suspects charged in the medieval-style killing of 7 people. This is U.S. Attorney's Office in L.A. All the people being charged are connected to a MS-13 subset called the Fulton Clique. Oh, I thought when President Trump talked about MS-13, he was just making stuff up. That, they're not really coming here. He's vilifying a whole country and a whole people, and it's just his fear of the other and so on and so forth. Well, these others that are gang members, there seems to be a reasonable reason to fear. Federal indictment revealed this week that members of the group, the Fulton Clique, a subset of MS-13, are suspected in almost 200 crimes in multiple states over the course of the past 9 years. The U.S. Attorney in L.A. called the Fulton Clique the most violent arm of MS-13. And that's saying something. But I guess so what do people who want open borders say to this? Why are they never asked of this? Kevin McAleenan, Department of Homeland Security chief, was enduring a House Oversight Committee hearing yesterday, with the likes of Elijah Cummings. And, of course, it's all about whether or not Border Patrol is showing enough empathy to people trying to come into this country illegally. McAleenan responded to that. I'm glad he did, on point, because there's no reason to direct away from it. Let's take all of these issues, all of the related issues, head on. Why would an agency, if they had a deficit of empathy, create a border search, trauma, and rescue team try to protect people who are trying to make this dangerous crossing? We make more than 4,000 rescues a year, these Border Patrol agents do, on their own time, with the collateral duty applied to the emergency medical technicians so they can help people in dangerous conditions. Where is the deficit of empathy there? These are predominantly Latino Border Patrol agents. They have children of their own, and they're out trying to protect them, putting their lives on the line in so doing.
And some agents in El Paso are their kids are being bullied at school because they've been vilified so much by the Democratic Party that it's hard for them to continue. And they've been at their jobs for 10, 20 years, and now this.
And to these other stories and systemic problems at the border that we're supposed to ignore, and this is all just more right-wing conspiracy theorizing. One of the issues, fraudulent families, separating families, kids in cages, that whole line of bull jive. Separating families, that's or fraudulent families, that's not a real thing. Border Patrol. Representative Carol Miller asking about this. In fiscal year 2019, the Department of Homeland Security identified nearly 5,500 migrants presenting as family units that turned out to be fraudulent. Why would adults use children to help them cross the border? Right.
Because they get processed quicker. Instead of being in, a detention center for 60 days, you're supposed to be 20 at max.
And McAleenan said that's a focus of Border Patrol this year, to identify the adults bringing children with them that are not their own. But it's not easy. We've had a lot of egregious cases, including a 51-year-old man who bought a 6-month-old child for $80 in Guatemala, admitted that when confronted with a DNA test by a Homeland Security investigations agent. But you had this DNA testing, which is just sort of in its pilot stage, and these investigations into the veracity of claims of a parent-child relationship. Not easy to do when you're overwhelmed at the border by the sheer volume of people and alleged families coming over. And so there's no order to it. And so the administration of, well, the vetting and processing is uneven because there's no order to it. So I think you have a lot of people that are trying to address any questions that want to be asked as best they can and provide as much of a picture as possible. And then you have people going down there, running around, staging photographs, calling border security people Nazis, and saying these processing centers are concentration camps. Who's serious about doing something to protect people on both sides of the border and who isn't? That seems to me to be the operative, ultimate question. For more on this topic, we're pleased to be joined by Don Rosenberg. He's the president of Advocates for Victims of Illegal Alien Crime, AVIAC. And he is also somebody who's had a loss at the hands of a person in this country illegally. Don, thanks so much for joining us. Appreciate it.
Oh, no, my pleasure, Dan, and Amy, thanks for having me.
So why don't we just start? I mean, but so much of this is storytelling because I just don't think data impresses people. So if you don't mind, your story of how you got involved in this issue.
Well, in 2010, my son was in law school in San Francisco. I live in the Los Angeles area, but he was up in San Francisco. Just coming home one night on his motorcycle. It was rush hour. No one's arguing that the traffic was barely moving. He was slowly going through a intersection when an illegal alien driving without a license tried to make a quick left-hand turn, to beat the traffic, and they collided. Had he stopped, I wouldn't be on the phone with you right now because he only went about 20 feet, and my son, and neither of them was barely moving. But instead, he accelerated, trying to get up the street. He drove over my son, but his helmet had become dislodged under one of his tires, so he couldn't go forward. He backed up, driving over him a second time, and then again trying to escape. Went forward a third time, but by that time somebody had gotten out of their car and very bravely stood in front of his, and he stopped, but his rear tire was on my son's abdomen, and 5 guys had to lift the car off him. He was essentially, dead at the scene.
Oh my, I'm so sorry. It's just heartbreaking. And then the next day, he turned himself in, correct?
Excuse me, I couldn't hear you.
I said the next day, this Rodriguez guy, he fled the scene, but he turned himself in.
Well, that's not my case, but yes, in the Corey case, yeah, but he turned him. He fled. This guy never got away, okay. And it turns out he wasn't drunk, wasn't on drugs. He was just trying to flee because he didn't want to get caught. But what happened, in Corey's case, happens a lot because the penalty for hit and run and killing somebody is less than the penalty for drunk driving and hitting somebody. So obviously, and we can see from what happened with the trial and the bond and everything, his attorney advised him, turn yourself in, they'll give you a low bond, you get out, and knowing full well that when push came to shove, and this happens all the time, and by the way, this was a big issue that was never explained well at the hearing you were talking about. When push came to shove, they'll show up, but then they disappear. So, if they're convicted, they're gone. And that's why the attorney for this Rodriguez guy is so angry, claiming he was ambushed, which is really pretty disgusting. Your client allegedly killed somebody, even though he admitted he did it. Allegedly killed somebody, and you were ambushed because they don't want to let him go. Plus the fact he's already missed a hearing, his deportation hearing. He didn't show up. So, how we treat all of these cases, and I thought my case was unique because I paid attention to stuff. You can't live near L.A. and not realize, I have for 30 years, the problem of illegal immigration. But it doesn't, come close to home. But my case and so many others, which is why we formed AVIAC, because we all realize that this is happening to everybody, is not the exception, it's the rule. We're treated like the criminal. My son did something wrong. Corey must have done something wrong. And you can go on and on and on down the list, because this guy, he's just trying to get to work. Now, ironically, I was told by the San Francisco DA's office, well, day one when we were there, the police inspector told us the guy was illegal. Day 2 or 3, I get a call. They're telling us, no, he's in the country legally. It took 11 months, many appearances on various radio shows, when an ICE agent surreptitiously, not through ICE, contacted me and said, I hear you on the radio. I hear you keep saying that this guy was in the country legally, just driving without a license. He came in the country illegally. He is not here legally. And even at that point, my advocacy was still about getting unlicensed drivers off the road. It really wasn't focusing on immigration. What kind of pushed me over the edge, and you can, when you read this hearing, I was at a police commission hearing and testifying, and this was just about impounding cars of unlicensed drivers. And one of the panelists said to me, I'm so sorry for your loss, but, and I don't remember the name he used, but Jose has to get to work. And I'm like, serious?
Yeah.
And then I started doing, and the last 15 years of my life, or last 15 years of my working life, I was a publisher of multiple magazines, but one was really into market research and statistical analysis in the entertainment business. So I know, it's not where I was trained, but I know how to look things up. I know how to read around. I know how to formulate questions so they're not biased. And I'm hearing all these things, oh, these people contribute so much to the economy and they don't commit any crime. And when you start digging into okay, here's the source, and then you actually read the report, it's like, this is all BS. First of all, it's irrelevant. It doesn't really matter. So if you commit less crime, then it's okay. If you commit less crime than the native born, are you telling me it's okay? And if I said that to protect myself, oh, well, I'm a white person and white people commit less crime than black people, I'd be hung up by the rafters as a racist. And I should be, because it doesn't matter what color you are. But that's what you hear all the time. And to your point earlier, Dan, when you watch, nobody watches those hearings. I mean, you maybe do, I do, but the general public doesn't. What you see are clips. And if you watch MSNBC, CNN, you'll see, Cummings going crazy and screaming and whatever, but you won't see McElhinney, or I can't even pronounce his last name. You won't see his answer.
Right.
Or they'll give 2 seconds of his answer and not let him. Sometimes they don't even let him finish.
Well, I just want to go back. So the Corey Cottrell case we've covered on the show before, but I just want to provide some context. This is the 39-year-old from Normal, Illinois, Central Illinois, who was struck and killed recently, and the whole issue of Rodriguez, who is the individual responsible for his death. And then your son's case, just to close the loop on that, what ultimately happened to the man responsible for killing your son?
Well, the case started falling apart literally 10 days later, and this is again why we formed this group, because you got to warn people ahead of time what might happen. At the preliminary hearing, we were told not to, and we had already told the district attorney's office we will be involved in every aspect of the case. We'll fly up every time there's a hearing, yada, yada, yada. They called us on a Friday. The hearing was supposed to be Monday, said don't come. The hearing's been continued. And then Monday night, I get a call from the DA telling me the results of the hearing.
What?
And the judge dropped the charge, or lessened the charge from a felony vehicular homicide to a misdemeanor.
Why?
And I didn't I realized that why the charge was dropped, but I didn't realize the impact of it until later on. And that's the kind of stuff you have to watch for, because his bail was at $300,000 when it was felony hit and run, so he would have to come up with $30,000. Now his bail is at $30,000, and he has to come up with $3,000. And of course, the next day he was out. He didn't flee, but he's out and whatever.
Well, there's no reason to flee when you're going to just get hit with a misdemeanor. Yeah.
Oh, right. The maximum penalty he faced at that point was a year in jail and a $1,000 fine. Because of California's overcrowding at the time, the year in jail would have immediately been cut in half. It would have been 6 months. He ended up getting, we did get a conviction, which was only because of luck and too long of a story to get into, but the DA's office there is atrocious. And by the way, Kamala Harris was the district attorney when he was killed, and then she was the attorney general while all this was going on and refused to ever speak to us. Mm-hmm. So he ended up spending 43 days in jail. And I had met with my congressman once he was sentenced to jail, and I said, I just want to make sure the guy is detained and deported. Now, by this time, I'm into the illegal immigration issue because this is now like 2013, I think, or end of 2012. And he wasn't really anxious to help, but he did. He had a letter from USCIS that said, Mr. Gallo will not be detained and deported because he's only committed one crime of moral turpitude. So what I didn't realize is he was already out. They had already let him go, which California law, you're required to notify victims if you let somebody out early. Almost 9 years, I'm still waiting, or 8 years.
Do you still keep tabs on him?
Excuse me?
Do you still know where he is?
No. I refused to accept that, and it took me about 8 months. Okay. And talking to everybody in the Sun, and over time I've met a lot of people, and I met a lot of people in this thing. And there was a woman at the San Francisco Chronicle, Deborah Saunders, who wrote some scathing editorials about this. Jessica Vaughn, who works with Center for Immigration Studies, helped me a lot behind the scenes. And I just said, this is not going to happen. He's not going to go back to his family like nothing ever happened, and I get to go to the cemetery whenever I want. So it took about 8 months, and they finally picked him up. And in April the following year, he was deported. The irony is that his wife had a deportation order from 2006, and she just didn't show up. And they never went looking for her, which would have been easy because she was still at the same address in 2013. Had they deported her, this would have never happened because they were on their way to parenting class when the driver hit my son and killed him. And it was not, we're having a baby, let's learn about parenting. This was court-ordered parenting class. One of their kids was 4 and one of their kids was 8.
Good grief.
So that's what I found out when he was trying to get bonded out, and I went to Arizona for the hearing. When I went for his deportation hearing, I found out that their 2 kids weren't their kids. ICE had no idea whose kids they were. And, they had claimed that they had adopted them. Of course, there was no record of adoption. Both of them were already in this country when the kids would have been born.
I mean, this is like Don. Sorry to interrupt, Don, but I mean, this is like every single issue we're talking about, all wrapped up into your life. It's unbelievable.
And all, these cases, the more you can dig into them, they all end up having the same elements. That these people, and I understand they're here illegally. They're a separate subset of society where even if they're not, robbing people and raping and murdering, whatever, they have a completely different way of living.
Don, I'm sorry we got to let you go, but I appreciate, I think just telling that story is more illuminating and important than all the data we go through and all the congressional testimony we go through. I mean, I just think people just need to hear this and be able to share stories of actual families they can see themselves in the exact same position and there before the grace of God go I. And I hope that's what people take away from your story. I mean, it's just unbelievable. The story of our friend Brian McCann, who we've had on the show, before as well,
Oh, yeah.
talking about his brother. I mean, this stuff, the
Just
tolerance
breaks your
people
heart.
have for the violence without consequence in this country is remarkable to me. Don Rosenberg.
Most people don't know.
Yeah,
They
well,
don't know.
right.
I mean, my line was when Kate Steinle was killed, half the people in the country think she was the first person killed by an illegal alien. The other half never heard of her.
Yeah.
And I was wrong. I think it was, 20% think she was the first person ever killed. The other 80% have never heard of her. She's the only person since my son was killed that's gotten national coverage that was sustained. You don't hear anything now, but
Yeah, you're right.
she was then.
You're right. Don Rosenberg, president of Advocates for Victims of Illegal Alien Crime. AVIAC is the organization. Don, thanks for joining us. Appreciate it.
Thank you so much, Dan.
Keep up
Amy,
the
thank